Good evening, everyone. It is a true privilege to have Honorable Minister Dr. Jitendra Singh sir here with us. Today's gathering, we've had a whole number of sessions around the role of domestic institutions and how robust it has been, and how the path to getting to a larger dependency on domestic capital relative to the global funds. Um, so the topic today that we're talking about is India at an inflection point. If we think about the last decade, India has been largely defined by the digital revolution, whether you look at fintech, e-commerce, software. But as we look at the next decade, so the script is changing. We're moving away from digital India towards deep tech India. So, we're seeing a big shift towards the sunrise sectors, be it space, be it biomanufacturing, green hydrogen, quantum computing. These are different sectors that need not just capital, it needs a longer tenure. There's a significantly more risk appetite that is required. And more importantly, it's important to be Atmanirbhar even in our capital. We need more domestic institutions to be able to back this from a longer term and a much more riskier journey. So the government has been responding with historic speed here. We operationalized the Anusandhan National Research Foundation, the landmark Bio E3 policy, and most significantly, just earlier this month, last month, uh, the historic RDI fund with 1 lakh crore has been announced. So, wanted to start off by getting your views on this. I think India has taken a historical step here to support high risk, high reward sort of research. What is the vision behind this fund? What are your expectations in terms of what we can achieve? And lastly, sir, why is the timing most importantly right today?
No, thank you. Thank you. I think taking it from where you started, of course, this RDI fund is something interesting because every venture capitalist is interested in it. But let's first understand what led to this, what inspired this, what motivated this, and how we reached that decision, as you said. And as you mentioned in your opening remarks, new sectors, so called space, nuclear. But to my mind, I think they were not actually new. We have started newly looking at that. Space has been there for centuries, and India's space program began in early 1960s. The ISRO was officially established in 1969, though they had started working even before that. Our nuclear program began right almost from the dawn of independence when Homi Baba chose to stay back in India instead of having gone back after the vacation which he had come here for and could not go back on time because of the Second War. So all these sectors were there, but somehow they were not on the priority of the policymakers or the political dispensations that existed. And for the first time, after Prime Minister Modi came in 2014, we have started looking at these sectors. And I think the motivation behind that is multifold. A, that if we are looking forward to move on in our economic stature or ranking, just as we were fragile five when we came from 10, now we are four, then we hope to go back to three, two, and one. So, how do we go? So, as good scientific researchers and as good venture capitalists, that's something that we should be asking ourselves. So, obviously, you would be able to move up only if you find ways of value addition. And the value addition will come, of course, by adding value to the existing sectors and also by exploring value to the sector from the sectors which were either hitherto underexplored or unexplored. And these are some of the sectors, as you rightly mentioned. Space did exist, but we did not give it the kind of attention that it deserved. Nuclear sector was not handled in a universal perspective. Deep techs, the rest of the world had started looking into this. We were not looking at this. So, in other words, as I said, the motivation is manifold and at multiple levels. It could also be said that we are now into this because we have now started following the global strategies of growth. So, being a part of the global world and and we're saging ourselves the ambitious goal of being rank one. We can't be working in silos. We can't be following our own self-complacent methodologies. So that's how we are here now, because most of these developed countries and their success stories have been written with an active participation of the private sector. But unfortunately, the mindset was here that if you in the morning walk, if you go and you talk about your space, somebody else would say, what if it has been done? देखिए NASA ने तो कब का कर दिया, without realizing that NASA doesn't depend on the government. So it has become our habit to look up to government for everything. And to be honest, I think the private this RDI fund is one of the unique initiatives by the government, also because to address that habit of looking up to the government. Actually, what is expected is that ultimately the private sector takes over in a big way, which I'm sure will happen. But I also, without holding any grudge, the private sector actually also was not prepared. That one day suddenly we would have a political dispensation which would open up the nuclear sector. So they concentrated on manufacturing, they concentrated on infrastructure. They were also not prepared that suddenly one day space will open. So the fault doesn't lie at easy side. The fault lies in the kind of strategies that we followed, which created a kind of a mindset both sides, public sector and private sector, and then that also widened the gap between the two to the extent that both the sides sometimes would look at each other with skepticism. The private sector would feel shy of public sector because that carried the perception that you will have to keep going to the corridors of power, not getting the kind of outcomes that you deserve. And the public sector thought that you were there to uh, just get a fast buck for some whatever means. So that gap has been bridged. And if it is not bridged, we will not move forward. So initially, to initiate, to boost, to incentivize, in simple terms, I think this fund has been floated. And of course, the expectation is that then the private sector will become a major partner as it should be. Only then we would be able to compete globally effectively.
Thank you, sir. I think the reason why we are having the conversations on the RDI is, the room is filled with a number of practicing fund managers. And so this is something that's very close to our heart. Clearly, this is a once in a generation kind of moment. Um, so, as you rightly said, I think it requires the role of, obviously the government is playing its role here, and so it's an important aspect that the private sector also contributes. So, as you think about this fund, it is going to be fairly complex in the way it will be achieved, right? Because there's fund of funds, there's you'll be giving long-term capital to DFIs, so the operationalization will have its own sets of challenges. So any thoughts, sir, in terms of as we're building the infrastructure, the institutional architecture around it, what are the strategic things that you're thinking about to add more credibility, capability, etc. We've seen some of the success stories that, things like NAPFID, which is, as you know, since in the last 3 years has already deployed 75,000 crores. So, sir, any thoughts on how the government is thinking of operationalizing, building that infrastructure?
No, I think to that extent, let me begin by complimenting the IVCA, the Indian Venture Alternative Capital Association, because you are an interface, a non-government interface, possibly. And we are also in the process of creating such interfaces within the governments to facilitate this, because as I said, there's a new beginning for both sides. So instead of randomly getting into a collaboration, we would have a more scientific, better designed methodology. Like, for example, we started off with space, where we have in space, which decides the nature of collaboration, the scale of collaboration, the theme of collaboration, even whether it's going to be domestic or international, and also the entities of the collaborators, both sides. And now, of course, BIRAC is another success story. Again, virtually like an interface, it it also facilitates. So I think BIRAC on that side and IVC on the other side can perform as a very excellent optimum combination. So that's how we'll move on. And as far as operationalization is concerned, I think the government has floated this fund, not only the terms of the volume, which of course is 20,000 crore, which is 20 lakh crore, which is what is attracting the entire audience in this room. But besides that, one should appreciate the kind of liberal mind and broad-minded approach with which the government has done it. So the interest is going to be, it's going to be low interest, it's going to be long-term interest, it's going to be equity with risk coverage or whatever you call it. So I think it's done quite generously, and I'm sure it would be taken up in a spirit that when the private sector comes forward, it doesn't only come forward to make money out of this, it also comes forward to generate money in the long term for the mutual good of all, the capitalist or the investor on the one side, the government on the other side, a society or a nation as a whole. As Rajesh was saying, that it also contribute to the next revolution, which is said to be bio-driven. So all these things will form a larger ecosystem. And with that noble idea, this initiative has been undertaken.
Thank you, sir. I think the IVCA will, thank you for mentioning it. And the IVCA will certainly be very glad to help, as we think through this. And so if there's any role that we can play, definitely it would be our privilege.
I think your role will start from this room itself. You try to figure out who are the right kind of persons for us to associate with, instead of our MD getting approached randomly by everyone and then doesn't know whom to associate with.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
But that doesn't undermine the role of others, because different slots may be most optimum for different investors. So I'm not undermining the role of people. Everybody is welcome. But what is important is also to scientifically determine where would one fit in and what collaboration would be ideally suited for which investment and between which partners. That's precisely what I mean.
Certainly, sir. Certainly, this will be a privilege to do that. So you touched upon the low interest rate, and we were a little curious on that. Given this, the will be long term loans and high risk investments in complex investments. You think the 3% margin, seems to be on the lower side. I mean, So any thoughts, and as we thought about formulating some of these things?
Yeah, it could be 3, it could be slightly less than 3. So let's work it out, because the first call is there from the 15th of November, which is last up to 15th of January. Then we'll work out what are the early initiations, and depending upon the kind of response and the entries, we would move on, because it's going to be a learning experience also for us and for both the sides. And in fact, at least I am, and I hope I'm speaking for all of us uh, on my side, that we are open to learn and open to understand from you, to also understand your constraints, your advantages, your inputs, and accordingly modify our way forward. That's how it should be, because it has to be in a spirit of very close mutual understanding, instead of cautiously or uncautiously seeking, or appearing even to seek the good of the better of the other one. So that trust is very important.
No, really appreciate that because as you rightly mentioned, no reform can be done in isolation. It has to be on both sides. So I think really appreciate the dialogue and the conversations. I know there are questions around what's the definition of DFI? Why does it not include things like Exim Bank, etc. But I'm sure, sir, that will be something that will be worked out.
Sure.
So I changing gears, the theme of strategic autonomy. If you think about it, the government has, first did this 1,000 crore space ventures to support the private sector players. We also have something called Bharat Startups, right? And then you've launched this nationwide innovation challenge with a specific call to our younger folks, the Gen Zs, that innovation shouldn't be limited only to the large metros. So, sir, as you think about it, today, as we move towards Viksit Bharat 2047, there's a deep tech boom that's going to happen. How do we ensure that it is not limited to the tier one cities? How do we reach the tier two, tier three places like your Udhampur, or how does a student in some of these places get the same access to
No,
Atmanirbhar capital like the founders in Bangalore or Delhi?
No, I totally agree with you. And we would not be able to achieve optimum results unless each and every citizen gets involved. And luckily now, with kind of the tools of information available, it should not be difficult. The access to information, the access to any option is no longer difficult as it might have been about, say, 2 decades back. And before that, but before I say anything more on that, let me also clarify to this well-informed audience that even today, out of that nearly 1.75, going close to 2 lakh startups that we have in India, which has also placed India as rank 3 in the startup ecosystem of the world, almost as many as I think must be around 60,000 belong to tier 2 and tier 3 cities. It's just a myth created by our jargon sitting in these fancy rooms, that it appears that it's only in Bangalore, it's only in Mumbai, it's only Hyderabad. Of course, they have an advantage of having a good ecosystem like Bangalore has, particularly for deep tech. Hyderabad has, but the startups are in plenty from the other towns. And that's, as I said in the beginning, if you recall this, the one term that I used, I wish to repeat, the ecosystem. Because in the ecosystem, one component is aspiration, which we don't talk about much. And that aspiration level also contributes to the success of a startup or the making of a startup or to the sustenance of startup. And that aspiration level is much, much higher in some of these smaller towns compared to the metros. Because a boy or a girl hailing from a small town, sea town, always has the urge with vengeance to prove to the rest of the world, look here, I can also do it. And they are doing it. It's amazing the manner kind of startups we have, because I keep interacting with them almost every day. Some very young boys, girls, and I do so for my own learning, because that's the best feedback. Like, for example, if you have IIT JEE exam, or if you have the NEET exam, you don't, you might be on the, you might err on the wrong side if you go by the ranking given by the magazines. But if you go by the NEET counseling pattern, IIT JEE, but the boys and girls tell you which is the better college, depending on their placement service, their uh, preferences for admission. So similarly, if you meet these boys and girls, like the other day, I and Rajesh actually were in one of these very small aspirational towns called Dholpur in Rajasthan. And of all the places we went to, prefer to go to a government girls' high school, which, sitting in this room, we feel, oh, they are left out, they are far away, everything happening in Bengaluru. And, then I said, usually I prefer to talk to them and let them talk to me instead of doing my kind of, unilateral discourse, because that age is gone. Otherwise, the children go home and make fun of you with their parents. So it's better to listen to them, because they are the opinion makers now. And you know what one girl rose up and said? She said, I want to compliment you. You started a very magnificent scheme for school girls called Vigyan Jyoti. That's a scheme which we started through Department of Science, which is also the sister department. But why this scheme creates the eligibility barrier of class 9 to class 12? Why not 8? I am 8, my sister is 6. We had no answer. Evening I came back, I spoke to the secretary, Science Department of Science and Technology, how we could figure out. Of course, we had some other, but you see the aspiration level. A girl sitting in that remote town is aware, more aware than many of us sitting over here in the capital city of New Delhi, that look here, there is a new option which has started for us, and it's been started very recently. But I have to wait till I reach class 9. So what I mean to say is that it is, I think that also. Secondly, the other myth associated with this startup jargon is that you have to be a very big PhD and some, great scientist and IITN and all those things, which again is not true. Actually, what happens is when we have eminent people like Rajesh Gokhale and others, you get mesmerized. But many of our startups are there who are not even graduates, particularly in the agri sector, are, are very beautiful um, success story which has created ripples across the country and started from one Himalayan state. Now the other Himalayan states are emulating it. Is that of Aroma Mission. which also began from the same ministry. We have now close to 4,000 successful startups rolling in millions. And many not even startups, many even not even graduates, but they have the aptitude, they have the passion, they have that obsession or genoon to be there and to, get deeper into it. And once they start finding returns, they themselves start evolving to the next level. You know what happened? I mean, this is how when the children talk to you, and some I prefer talking to them, and I encourage them to talk to me more frankly than they would talk to their parents, because the parents create certain, riders. Then you learn. The other day, a group of boys came to me. They were vendor startups, and they said, "I said, now what have you come for? You've become richer than all of us within a few years, because this program began just about 45 years back." So he said, "No, sir, we have a suggestion." So I said, "What's that?" "ये चाइना का सामान हिंदुस्तान में बंद कब होगा?" वो कहा, भाई तुम अपने काम से मतलब रखो, ये तो विदेश मंत्रालय का विषय है, आपको इसमें क्या चिंता पड़ गई? And the boy tells me, "Sir, our small bottle of perfume used to sell 15,000. These guys have started selling it for 12,000. So we had to competitively reduce the rate." That's where you come. So when they are into this, then they are not, they have to be good learners. That's important for a good, successful startup. It should be learn not only in terms of technology, also in the terms of finances, where to look for. Many of our first generation space startups have now got huge foreign investment, because once they're into it, then they start also learning where to get investment from, where to add value to my product, how to sustain. And as the competition increases, they also know how to move on to the next level. So I think we have a beautiful ecosystem. And as I said in the beginning, the most enabling factor that has happened in the last 1 decade is Prime Minister Modi, because all these schemes which have been initiated couldn't have been done if we didn't have a prime minister who did not have the capacity to break the taboos of the past. So, and all these, whether it's a nuclear sector, whether the space sector, before the scheme is rolled out, even the biotechnology, BioE3C, he's he who personally, asked for briefings, not one, but multiple, which was possibly not happening in the earlier governments, where science technology didn't receive the kind of attention that's now receiving now. So I think we have a very beautiful ecosystem, and this is also the right time for the venture capitalists and also the investors to invest in this new area. Because after all, you also have to find the new areas of investment. The earlier areas of business are now dwindling away. Now, you see, whenever, now with the starting of these national highways all across the country, wherever I go, people come in delegations. साहब हमारे तो मिठाई की दुकान इतनी चलती थी, या समोसे की दुकान इतनी चलती थी कि रास्ते में लोग गाड़ियां खड़ी करके चाय पीते थे. अब क्या करें, वो फ्लाईओवर बन गया, उधर से चला जाता है. So you have to tell them, see, you can't stop development. These things will happen. The world will keep changing. It's a dynamic. It's not only in my age it's happening. It might have happened last century. It'll happen next century also. So we also have to keep evolving. So I think this is also a good acclimatization for us for the changing scenario. And good that India is now becoming part of that global scenario.
So very, very wise words. I think, each of us in this room, I'm sure, have experienced it as well. As a fund, we've been investing, sir, for 26 years, focused on Asia, in India. And the question we often get asked is, why aren't you going into Asia? Why aren't you going elsewhere? Sir, the opportunity is huge here. The entrepreneurs, as you said, the entrepreneurial spirit is amazing. We have young people who are willing to go against the grain and do what they do, follow their passions. I think digital connectivity has certainly helped where earlier it was limited to certain areas, or you could based on your education. I think today the internet is a school that can teach you a lot of things, and you've got to be the right learner. And India has been at the spearhead of taking those quantum jumps, sir. I mean, the example I often quote was, India में कभी pager था ही नहीं, right? We skipped the pager. We moved from landlines to mobile phones. The rest of the world is there. We don't have to follow the path that
No,
everywhere else.
actually, sorry to interrupt you. We were late initiators always till about last 1 decade. And when you talked about the IT sector, the communication sector, we were about one and a half decade behind. For example, if television happened in the United States of America in 1950s, We saw our first Chitrar in the capital city of Delhi in 1970 when they had already moved on to the color TV, and that too in small slots. So now it's no longer so. We are among the first to have a dedicated biotechnology policy. We are among the first, barring a few countries, to open up our nuclear sector to the private players, and so on and so forth. And then we have the advantage, which they don't have. We have the advantage of Himalayas. We have the advantage of a long coastal area, 11, 12,000 kilometer long. That also is now we started this deep ocean mission. Again, it'll become a huge, I think you will have to step in there also as investors association, because once we get going with the deep ocean mission, which is already being undertaken, we'll have a lot of mineral mining and metals, a lot of fishery business inside. So again, we'll require the help of the. So as I said, even for the investor, this is going to be a new learning experience and also very exciting. And it's also going to discover new areas. And some of these areas are soon going to emerge, more of them.
So we're sitting in 2025. It's clearly an inflection point today. If I were to put you on the spot, sir, and say, how if we move the clock to 2030, 5 years away, if you had to describe the Indian science and tech landscape, what is the one big change you see that will happen that doesn't exist today?
I think the change of mindset. Even when boys and girls were going out, they had that mindset कि साहब यहाँ कुछ नहीं होगा. बाहर जाएंगे तो बनेगा, पैसा भी वही बनेगा, रिसर्च भी वही बनेगी, नोबेल प्राइज भी वही होगा. And to add to what we were discussing in response to your earlier question, I think many of this, they'll be glad to know that we have, if we are now having about, say, 67,000 or so of the patents, almost 55% or 56% are Indian residents. So the things as they have evolved, they have also changed our mindset. वो ऐसा नहीं है कि हर गोविंद खुराना बाहर गए तो तभी कुछ हुआ. यहाँ होते तो कुछ. Now they are these 55, 56% are the boys and the girls born here, brought up here, groomed here, taught here, learned here, did their work here, and excelled. That means now all those opportunities which they went there looking for are available over here. And as they say in our scriptures, कि संस्कार बदलने में 3 पीढ़ियां लगती हैं, whether it's for the good or for the bad. So my and your generation, they are transiting. So we are trying to understand, oh, now this is happening. Listen, the generation before me did not even get into that far as we have. But the generation which is being born today, which of course you said Gen Z, is actually growing up with this. So they would have a different mindset, absolutely. And that change is now becoming very visible. Even some of those young boys and girls who are going abroad today, for whatever reason, even to add value to their learning, are actually planning the timeline of coming back. It's not that पहले होता था कि वहां जाएंगे कुछ हो जाएगा फिर सोचेंगे. तो सोचने में इतने साल निकल जाते थे कि they would not be able to come back, or even if they wanted to come back, the other reasons, extraneous reasons, prevented them because they had brought up, they had raised families over there. The families would not be ready to get back. Because I came across a case who had left Delhi in 1980s, wanted to come back now, and we also tried to arrange something for him. And later on, when he went back and got back to me, he said, I am ready, but my family doesn't. And that was what he said. The next sentence was an eye opener for me. He said, my children have not even visited India. For the holiday, also, they used to go to a European destination. But that has again changed. So I said, ecosystem. The Prime Minister has also encouraged that. Vocal for local. He's been insisting on the domestic destinations of holiday, which have also started picking up now. Now people even like to go for a holiday to Ayodhya. They combine it with a pilgrimage. They like to go on a holiday to Kedarnath. So they combine it with a pilgrimage. So the entire, I think, milieu has undergone change, and that will lead to a change of mindset in the generation which is coming up now. And then one thing will follow the other for good reasons.
Wonderful. No, sir. Thank you. It's been a privilege to hear from you. I think clearly, the leadership uh, from the honorable Prime Minister, yourself, is driving this change. in India. We clearly are at a very strong inflection point, and all of us in this room are very excited about the journey for the next, 20 plus years. We're looking forward to 2047, Viksit Bharat.